So I've seen a couple videos, all different topics, but they featured these two knives, and it always came up that, you know, if they had to choose which one was their favorite of the Chris Reeve Umnumzaan or Sebenza, which one would they take? Which one do they, at least right now, lately, they prefer? And I thought I'd make a quick little video comparing the two then, and explaining which one then I personally prefer, and just kind of put that out there. Now, you see here I have only the small Sebenza 21, and also I have the True North Knives exclusive Tonto Umnumzaan. Okay, and I can say that I wonder which one do you guys think I think is the better knife. Now, of course, first thing when I was doing my research about it, the Sebenza is a 3.2 millimeter blade thickness. Even on the large Sebenza, it's still that thickness. And so when I first was researching, of course, you know, I thought, man, the stronger knife then would be this 3.67 millimeters of the Umnumzaan. And the Umnumzaan is actually Mr. Reeve's everyday carry knife. That's what he says. And admittedly, it has a couple unique features I will talk about. But, you know, I've learned now also that, you know, a 3.2 millimeter blade can do quite a lot regardless, especially when it's an S30. It's still, for what it is, a folder, that's still quite surprising. Now, I've had some people say that, you know, they wouldn't take a Sebenza as a survival tool if they had to. But you know what? I would. And I would just because of the reasons that I know that the Sebenza is durable. You know, it's going to last. The lockup's going to last. I know, even though that the titanium is a little bit softer in my testing than a Sage titanium, Spyderco, or Strider's titanium, it's still famous for being able to last under just normal everyday use. You know, that lockup. Okay, but also then one of the biggest things would be the hardware, the screws all being good quality on both these knives, and especially though the pivot system on the Sebenza. I don't need Loctite for a Sebenza pivot, just like on the paramilitary, just like on the Sage 2. Those knives, you know, that process in itself means a lot. Now, if you have another knife where you have a pivot that's very large, like a Strider or something, and that needs Loctite, you know, there's tricks, you know, and I found, like recently, I've tried using that Teflon RC oil, and that actually keeps the pivot tight. I don't even need Teflon tape or Loctite. And perhaps that's something you could do to the Umnumzaan pivot. But without Loctite, the Umnumzaan pivot does loosen. And do you need a tool to take it apart? No, because you can use your finger pressure and take it apart. So see, I'm already unscrewed it a little bit. So I mean, you know, originally I thought, man, if the, you know, things got really bad, which knife would I take? I thought the ultimate knife would be this Umnumzaan. And you can see I've just tightened it back with hand pressure, and it'll center. And as it slowly shifts off center, it's just a hint that, you know what, that pivot is just ever so slightly loose. Because nevertheless, on both these knives, that pivot is machined properly and perfectly to where once it's tight, as in the idea of just, you know, tightened and not over tightened, it will center the blade automatically for you. Now, between the two knives, yeah, this Umnumzaan is cool because it does have a little bit more of ergonomics, meant for for at least some more grip in terms of if your hand were to slide. You know, it offers these little slide choils, kind of similar to the Tazula design, bevels to kind of keep your hand in place. Mostly focused up here, where that thinner area, the narrow area of your pointing finger will rest. You know, of course, neither of these have choils, but you know, the general shape, you know, it does kind of increase in size, and it does. I've, you know, stabbed into car tires, and it you know, it doesn't have any issues. I mean, kind of at first you're a little hesitant, you're a little worried, but nah, the grip, even when wet, is pretty solid. Both the washers on both are those Chris Reeve style with the milled holes in the washers that hold the fluorinated grease, which is kind of thick in them, and that works really well. Now, and this of course then has a couple more features too, the glass breaker, and you know, and this is 3.7-inch blade as opposed to the large Sebenza, which is 3.5. So overall, it seems like this is the beefier choice, the stronger knife to take. Now, when it comes down to it though, which knife do I prefer? I actually still prefer the Sebenza. You can see here mine has an extra screw from Mr. Reeve. He sent me one so that I could strengthen this back pivot portion, this back portion, because originally it only comes with one spacer and screw and standoff. And then that actually with hard use will loosen, so you will need two. Once that's there, no problem. But then, you know, to me this ball detent, when I look at the back of the blade tang, I can see just how, you know, worn out and how it just kind of cut into that blade tang. And for me then, you know, I like the old-fashioned, just normal lockup, you know, that large area, contact area of a normal Sebenza, you know. And so that's one of the things definitely for me. Now, thinking about like using it for survival or long-term use, I even picked up an extra pivot, extra O-ring washers from Mr. Reeve, extra everything hardware for this knife. And will the pivot probably need it? No. But you know, it's nice. And will these rings ever wear out? I've heard that if they weren't on there, the lockup will still be fine. You know, and it's nice because if this kind of frame lock does get dirt in it, it will, you know, you can clean it off easily and open it and close it without anything jamming. Okay. So this is pretty cool, especially since, you know, with my usage of knives, you know, I wanted a durable tip, and this is a Tonto point, so it does, you know, it does work. And of course, the pocket clip's always the same. Now, why in the end I would still choose a Sebenza personally for me is perhaps the ergonomics. Funny enough, with this cutout right here, your finger really does sit kind of like inward. So even though there's not a real formal choil, this knife does seem to provide a more solid, secure grip. In my opinion, I feel more comfortable with this. Especially the smaller one, because it sits into my palm. So this one's very secure in my hand. Then, especially then, is that all the screws, and in the same instance, you could put another standoff right here as just to have a backup. You could have, you know, even more solid, even though this one has no problem back here. You could have a backup set. I mean, so in essence, you could actually, if you had, for example, for some reason you had an extra Sebenza, you know, the same, you could opt to switch this spacer out for that stop pin and have basically an entire backup stop pin, and you could have an entire backup pivot all here on your knife ready to go. So you'd have, like, you know, two stop pins and two spacers, two pivot systems on your one knife with you all the time. And then all the females and males are modular. They all can be switched. They're all the same size. So if anything does have any problems, fracture or whatever, you can switch it around. And then, like I said, one of the more important things is, to me, is just that the pivot doesn't require Loctite. So in a survival setting, I don't need to worry about dealing with that. The translation of Sebenza is work, and that's what this knife does make me think too, that it is a hassle-free work tool where I don't have to think about it. You know, I don't have to worry about maintaining it. It just does its job. It's going to hold the grease in there, and it's going to provide a long-lasting lockup. You know, an old-fashioned lockup with, you know, just old-fashioned bulk, just right there. It's sturdy enough to where nothing is going to unscrew on me, or I have to deal with any of that aspects. And that's it. So for me, actually, now, you know, now knowing what a 3mm blade can do, you know, I know this small Sebenza is a pretty expensive knife. The large Sebenza is actually more expensive than the Umnumzaan. And actually, if you ever were to have both and take them apart, you'll actually realize the reason why is there is actually more machining of parts for the Sebenza because of the tolerances of the pivot, bushing, the stop pin, spacer, the actual back spacer. The Sebenza actually has more parts that require precise machining, while the Umnumzaan is a little more simplified, just the pivot and this one back here that's just literally just a spacer anyway, not relevant to any much function. You know, that's why I think the Umnumzaan can be less expensive, but give you a bigger knife, which with a thicker blade, with also more detail on the handles and bevel work, yet somehow be less expensive. And that's because there actually is a lot that goes into a small or large Sebenza in terms of all the machining of it. So I hope that kind of shows some of the pros, I think, of the Sebenza. You know, I do realize, you know, in the survival situation, emergency situation, you know, the lack of it being ambidextrous, you know, although you can find ambidextrous versions, but it's still kind of tough. You know, the lack of versatility, you know, if a variety, it can make the usage of this knife and the choice of this knife not necessarily the best option. But I mean, I will say it's still a pretty good option. I mean, it's something that's still worthwhile packing. I mean, if I had to put this next to Paramilitary 2, you know, Paramilitary 2's lockup we saw was very strong, but it can be fragile. It's more for tactical use. But both the Paramilitary and this knife, you know, the screws of this are much more superior to the Paramilitary 2. But the Paramilitary 2 you can find with different steels, and it's versatile. It can be carried in different ways. It can be used tactically. So it provides a lot. But overall, just the quality of the knife, you know, the Sebenza still wins. And so if you're looking for a tool that may not be for tactical use, for actual just using and surviving, this is a pretty good option. I still really like the knife. I mean, like I tell you guys, you know, it's just not perhaps the most intuitive or, you know, versatile knife in my collection or what I've come across, you know, and it's pretty expensive. But I mean, if you do appreciate the craftsmanship, I mean, if this is, you know, a lot of custom knives kind of have this look, you know, basic ones. I mean, if you appreciate all that going into it to make it, you know, work like this and not having problems and always be smooth, and, you know, then it's pretty good. I do wish that Mr. Reeve, if he's watching, would go in and maybe shorten down this little arch right here, or somewhere around here, because it's not actually functional anything anyway. It's just for looks. So that this way, at some point when this back of the blade tang passes, I can easily go in there and just scrape off any gunk that got stuck on the back of my blade tang, so that in case it was jamming or something in there, it would lock up. So that would be nice. Kind of like the Hest and the Tazula Strider, you know, if it was just, that would be a little bit more realistic for work. I mean, if he had done that function. I mean, but if I was stuck with it, then, you know, I guess you get a stick or something, or at some point someone could go in there and do it themselves, perhaps. But regardless, that makes this knife very good. And plus, also the crispy pot clip really keeps the knife. It almost has like a double secured fastening. You know, you put it in once, and if you push it all the way to the very top, it gets really secure. With the weight combined with the bead blast and this clip, it won't fall out of your pocket. So it's reliable to know that it's going to be there. That's my opinion of the two. So a lot of people have been saying that they prefer the Umnumzaan. It has a P-Fear pivot. You know, it is more of an overbuilt version, but for me, it is the old-fashioned simplicity, the durability of this simple lockup, the old-fashioned frame lock, and the pivot system that doesn't require Loctite and any issues. And the modular, how modular and how versatile these screws can be interchanged, that make the Sebenza my personal survival choice. Thank you. One of the reasons why I do like the Sebenza now is because of the recent change to the lockup. You know, it's nice because it's not at that point of being like, you know, a Strider or other production frame locks that wear out too quickly. But it's not so much back to that, you know, Chris Reeve, you know, where it just kind of, you know, moves right back out, like it's so flush that it lasts forever but doesn't withstand any force. Like I can feel, if you guys can understand this, when I hold the Sebenza, that it's not going to withstand, like if I was to hang weight from it or spine like it really hard, that my other knives that I've tested could handle more, but this one I feel will last longer. And so it's kind of, to me, a fine, right in the middle, like a good middle ground. Mr. Reeve found a middle ground with this, and I like that. Like I wish Strider would actually maybe, you know, soften up their angle so that it would be a little bit, wear out a little bit more, you know, over time, not so quickly also. So I mean, I definitely like that about the Sebenza, and that's what makes me choose the Sebenza over the Umnumzaan, is because that ball detent on the Umnumzaan, that little ceramic ball, it's, you know, it's situated right in the middle of the lock bar, so it's not like it's a corner out here. It's just right there in the middle of the lock bar, and then, you know, it's a round surface that then contacts the blade tang. And whether or not I'm a knife engineer or not, you know, a round small point touching a blade tang that's sloped sounds like it would just slide, and that Umnumzaan failed that spine whack very easily. And so for me, I don't feel that the Umnumzaan is a classic strong design. I feel like perhaps if the Umnumzaan was built off of the Sebenza, then this was, what, 21 years plus now of a knife, you know, being given feedback and existing and being improved or refined. And then perhaps the refinements that created the Umnumzaan were more everyday friendly refinements. Things that maybe people had commented, in terms of how to make it more user friendly or more long lasting, not necessarily more hard use. So for me, the Umnumzaan, I feel, is not as robust as the old-fashioned Sebenza, the old-fashioned frame lock. Personally, my favorite Sebenza would be a large Sebenza with the Insigno, the little Warncliffe shaped blade, but or kind of sheep's foot Warncliffe, or a Tonto version. But I mean, I do like this one, and so that's probably one of the main reasons is that lockup difference between this and this Umnumzaan. So, thank you.